Hello, good evening, and welcome. Another Iris Nights lecture at the Annenberg Space for Photography. My name is David Scharf, and tonight I have the great pleasure of introducing a lecture called Tracking Time in America's Inner Cities with Camilo Vergara and Christopher Hawthorne. Camilo is one of the artists featured prominently in our exhibit. You can see a grid of his work over there, and it's also featured in our film. His long-term records are held at the Library of Congress, and he's renowned chronicler of societal shifts in changing urban landscapes. For more than 4 decades, he's devoted himself to systematically documenting the poorest and most segregated communities in urban America, from New York and Newark in the East, Detroit and Chicago in the Midwest, right here to our hometown, Los Angeles. Of his own work, Vergara says, "I think of my images as bricks. Through photography, I have become a builder of virtual cities." Christopher Hawthorne works in the office of Mayor Eric Garcetti as the Chief Design Officer of the City of Los Angeles, and before joining City Hall, he was architecture critic for the Los Angeles Times from 2004 to early 2018. We got him right before he got that call. So when I spoke with him first, he was still our architecture critic, and now we're very happy that we've gotten him his star on the rise. Tonight, Camilo and Christopher will be talking about the ways in which the passage of time can become a photographic subject in and of itself, capturing location, community as they rebuild and redefine themselves. Housekeeping, please make sure your phones are silenced. And I wanted to make sure that you knew that after the lecture, Camilo has a set of books that he's willing to sign. If you want to go back, buy a book, get a signature, we have some available. And now, please join me in giving a very warm Annenberg Space for Photography welcome to Camilo Vergara and Christopher Hawthorne.
Thank you, David. Can everybody hear me? As you can tell, we coordinated our outfits very carefully for the show. I want to thank David, Annenberg Space, for having us. It's really a pleasure to be here to talk about this remarkable body of work and to focus, as we will this evening, on Camilo's photographs of Los Angeles and its architecture. I'm going to hand it over to him, and he's going to take us through several photographs, which will actually start in New York, outside of LA, take us to LA, and we'll leave all of that to him. I will just say, by means of very brief introduction, that one of the most remarkable things about this body of work as it documents Los Angeles and its architecture and its street life, it is a very powerful rebuke to all of the cliches that we're all familiar with about Los Angeles being a place of wealth, of plastic surgery, of car culture, of superficiality, a place without history, a place without layers, a place without street life, for that matter, or pedestrian culture. All of those things are really given the lie quite powerfully and eloquently in this work. So Camilo will take us through a number of images, and we'll talk a little bit as we do that, and then we'll save a little time for a conversation. We'll do that for about an hour, and then we'll save 20 or 30 minutes for questions. So there'll be plenty of time for questions for him from all of you. So I'll hand it over to Camilo. Thanks, all of you, for being here.
It's a pleasure. I can't talk sitting down.
Please.
Stand up. I don't know why. So I came to the United States in 1965, and in 1970 I started living in New York, and my first interest was to go to the places in New York that were actually disappearing at the time, that they were either burning or disinvested or transformed into empty lots. I really wanted to know what was going to happen to those places. I mean, they show a view of the United States that I never imagined, before I came. So I'm very happy to show you some pictures first, and I'm very happy to be here and thank Kathy Hollander and David Sharp for organizing this meeting, and you all for coming. The picture you see here, it's one. I mean, you would walk the streets of New York, and this is in East Harlem, and the year is 1970, and you go and you see a wedding, and you can see how the buildings in the back are abandoned, how the empty lot is behind. But it's a wedding, and it has all the elements. And there, those of you who go to the movies next year, we're going to see it in a movie reenacted. So there'll be actors behind wearing the same clothes in a movie by Barry Jenkins, based on a story by James Baldwin. So I'm so happy I was there and was able to take this picture. The second one is just, I was being a street photographer. And I felt very drawn to characters like this. You can imagine that he's about to become a senior citizen by now. That was 1970. And there is such an intensity in the way he looks at you that every time I look at that picture, I sort of want to know what's happening, whatever happened to him. And it sort of resonates. I lived with these pictures for about 30 years. And I sort of kept them under my bed. And I never showed them because the times I showed them at the beginning, nobody was interested. There was Cartier-Bresson, and of course Cartier-Bresson was, there were no match, at least that's the way they look at it. And then there was Helen Levitt, and then they said, well, this is now Helen Levitt. But when I resurrected them about 10 years ago, they were picked up all over the place, and they're all over the internet. And one day they get played in Hungary, another day they get played in Russia, and they've been in The Guardian, in many other forms of media. So it's actually the pictures I'm the best known for. So these are pictures that I took when I was in my mid-20s. And again, what you see in the back here, I'm going to go back on this, which is it's this sort of street art that was very popular back then, and it's now sort of it's either transformed, goes two ways. In one way, it's that very famous muralist from all over the world that go to the neighborhoods and do the work, and then it sort of gets posted, and millions of people see it. You know their names, Banksy, and JR, and many other ones. But somehow this, I like it much more. I like, you never know who those people are. And today, when so many black artists have achieved fame and recognition that they deserved and become known all over the world, the ones that did this sort of thing have no name and no recognition. And I'm very happy that I was able to sort of keep those images. These are scenes. I mean, when I was 7 or 8 years old, I don't know, that car was, it was like a fantasy car that, something that you dream about when you are in Chile and you're 7 years old. And you think, well, one day, you'll ride into paradise in a car like this. And then you go to the Bronx and you see it.
I think we're working on it.
In this shape.
Sit, please.
So, yeah. I'm sorry to, I make it impossible for you to see it.
No, I can absolutely see. So while we're waiting, I'm curious about the Barry Jenkins, the director who made Moonlight.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit more about his plans for that film. You've heard about how that image will be used. It's fascinating.
Well, see, apparently there's
here we are.
Part of it takes place in Harlem, and there's a wedding scene, and I guess the wedding scene, they pay me, so I think it's going to run.
Okay, fantastic.
I hope they do. So actors are going to be dressed like the people there.
That's
I don't
fantastic.
know if they can have the same background or
Right,
anything.
right.
I can, because to tell you the truth, you can't see that background in New York.
It's different, right.
Anymore.
Yeah.
You see the poverty. I mean, the poverty remains, but the physical background of that poverty has changed. So again, that's the car of dreams, and another car of dreams, but he's having another different dreams, and here, is, you would see, you would see. This is somebody. This is in a picture in the Bronx, and it's about 1973, and it's a whole class of the school, that just found. So that's the next is the series. So if you want to say something,
Right. So now we move to Los Angeles, right?
Yeah.
And this
So
next.
should I go straight?
Yes, please do.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I always wanted to come to Los Angeles. Just I was in New York and I didn't have money, so I just always trying to find a way that somebody will send you to a conference, or somebody will give you an assignment, or some way that you could come
And can I ask you to back up even before that? When you were a kid in Chile, what images do you remember of Los Angeles? Was it Hollywood? Were you seeing images? Do you remember thinking about what it meant to live in Los Angeles from Chile, from South America?
Well, the images that I lived with were images of California, and it was because my grandfather and my father came in 1929. They came to San Francisco. So they talk about San Francisco, and they went to the redwood forest, and they drove through that tree that just fell, where you could drive through. So those images were very, very much in my mind. I just Los Angeles, I saw the movies. I used to go to the movies, but I couldn't tie the cartoons that I would watch, or movies like The Indiscreet or something, or with the landscape of Los Angeles. So it came as a surprise. But what was very similar, though, is the dry heat that you have here. It gets colder in the winter, and also the hills and the smell of trees. That was very much part of my experience. Also being in a place where so much Spanish is spoken, and so many signs and so many references to Latin America, and are part of this streetscape.
I wrote a little bit about Chile, a generation of Chilean architects, which is now emerging, quite talented. And when I was there, one of the architects told me that the coast of Chile is like the coast of California in terms of that landscape, except of course flipped upside down, running north to south in the way that we think of south to north in terms of changing climate. A lot of similar architecture for that reason.
Yeah. So the first time I managed to come here was in 1980. And this picture is from 1980. I had a different approach to LA that I had to New York, because I knew that I couldn't just come here every year. I wouldn't have the money. I wouldn't have I couldn't come every year. New York was right there. In Chicago, I had family. In Detroit, I had family. So those places were easy for me to stay. People would put me up and so on. So I took this photograph, and I was in Avalon Boulevard, as you can see, and the street is 108. And I was very happy to be able to link it to this very same structure, and we're now in 92. When I came in 87, then 92, but then again, I could link the picture to his place, because I had the Avalon Boulevard, and because I had the manhole cover there. And the shape of the building sort of stayed the same, that sort of shape. I don't know if this was the point when it changed from a sort of black type of business to a Latino type of business, but I assume that it happened at the next time around, and here we are.
And how many more years later is that? Do you know?
It's about 2 or 3 years later.
Okay.
And I have edited this series.
Now keep the word mattress in mind, because we're going to see some more of how the mattress market plays out.
Well, yeah. So. And here you have this transition when the building is just waiting for something, some use. One thing you see, of course, in the series is the disappearance of the telephones, you know. And here it's another, how can you say, design, would I say factor, you know, the way in which the police department affects the design of the city, because, of course, they see this and they say, get that furniture out of the sidewalk. And then, of course, the people that have the business put it on the building itself.
And it's now called The Last Chance also.
Yeah. And then here is just the front, and then, of course, I went too fast there, but it's just the front, and
that most recent photograph is taken when?
Yeah,
this one.
This is 86, 2016.
Okay.
So I've been back there, and I'm going to rephotograph this too.
So 36 years altogether,
yeah,
from the first to the last.
It's just. You know, and of course I have had to answer often the question that people says, why do you take pictures of insignificant buildings? why beautiful, you know, and photograph it, and it's you know, it's just what makes my blood run. You know?
And can you go back to, because also we have a tradition of photographing architecture this way in Los Angeles, though. If you think about Ed Ruscha, go back one more.
Yeah.
Think about Ed Ruscha's famous study, Every Building on the Sunset Strip. He's doing every building at a moment in time, one image of every single building, a kind of taxonomy. And you're doing something quite different, of course. The perspective is quite similar. I think you're both in the middle of the street when you're taking the photograph. This sort of perspective, almost exactly the same, and yet you're doing one building, one spot in the city over time. And of course, Ruscha was, you know, about mobility and looking at one street, all the different buildings on that street. So it's obviously a much more rooted. Were you aware of that body of work, or were you looking at?
Sure, I've looked at his gas stations and his little books that he had.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, that standard station. Then I think he did Route 66 too. Yeah, and I like the swimming pool work he did. I mean, it was a lot of fun. But I like this better myself, you know. So
Perfect.
So.
And are you shooting in the middle of the street? Are you standing or across the street? Where are you?
Well, you know, ideally I try to stand on the roof of the car, but I think in this case, I mean, there are some streets in LA where unless you do it at 3 in the morning, you can't do that.
Difficult to stand in the middle of the street.
Well, yeah, the traffic goes very fast. It doesn't respect you, and it's very dangerous. Yeah. So here is another set of buildings, 2.5 of them, and the year is 92. It began in 1992, so that is 26 years of this building, and it hit me in 2 ways. I mean, first of all, it's how everything seemed to be in transition. I don't know if there was an idea, you know, of what the building should be, if there was an idea of completion. You know, I think you wrote about the Getty Center at one time. You know, it's so complete that if they want to put an addition to it,
right, impossible to add to.
where are they going to add?
Right.
Well, if you look at these buildings, there's just you don't know if they're going to be replaced. You know, what's going to happen, and the lettering and the images there. You know, keep changing. I mean, what they sell, you know, carniceria and panaderia changes. Sometimes it's more of one thing than another. Sometimes it has 2 names, like Mexico Meat Market and El Milagro, so it's both things. And then it gets a pig, and it gets a cow, and then the bench disappears, and you keep seeing, and it's an area of the city. If you had gone there in 1970, it would have been mostly black. So when I started, Latinos were dominant there, but still, what happened is that you would see some elderly blacks that would pass by, and you also can see the heavy fortification. You can see the bars on the buildings. And here you have a Salvadorian restaurant there, which then gets replaced by a chain, which is Tam Burgers. And it's not just any chain, it's a chain that is it's a very black chain. It's a chain that rappers sing about. Kendrick Lamar thinks about it, and he says that if he goes there, the paparazzi will not follow him. But it seems that Tam Burgers didn't work in that location very well. So it came back, and it was a Salvadorian place.
Where there's a question about where it is in the city.
22nd and South Central Avenue. So
now there's some signage on the roof.
yeah, yeah. And that's the way the way it looks today. And now it has that brick facing, which is probably it's some symbol of stability, and you know, we're here to stay.
Permanence.
Yeah. And there's two black men waiting for the bus there,
and we were also talking a little bit before about this shift, which you were sort of bemoaning a little bit, from the hand-painted signage to these mass-produced vinyl signs that you begin to see more of.
Yes. And then again, we'll see it more clear as we go along. Again, I was very interested in the alleys of LA. So every time I come, I do 100 miles of alleys, maybe more. And I often stand up on the top of the roof to look at the backyard. So I'm sort of spying on the people least likely to be spied on. And here is a man that is bringing his pot full of elotes, which is corn husks that have been cooked. So, you know, I mean, that's a very cheap, you know, with a little butter, it makes for a very cheap lunch. So a lot of the factory workers buy them.
Now, a picture like this, I'm curious how you're setting this up. How long do you spend in that alley? Are you up on how do you get this vantage? Are you up on a ladder?
Yeah, I mean, I probably saw him way in the distance.
Yeah.
And then I set up the car and set up the picture, and he just comes in, and then I get to talk to him a little bit.
And how long would you stay in a location like that? When you're visiting and you're trying to maximize your time, I'm curious, how long would you stay to make one photo like this?
You see, sometimes it's not so much the sense of time, often it's the sense of danger, because you got to look behind you and see you're carrying a few $1,000s worth of equipment. You have a brand new car that you rented, and you know, you think that that may be of interest to someone. So any case, that's one of the alleys, and here we have
more mattresses.
Another one, where you begin to see sort of that the other economic life of Los Angeles. And I think the mattress here comes again. So what you do there is that somewhere in the backyard of a house, they're cutting down all mattresses and taking parts that can be introduced or be part of a new refurbished mattress. And somehow they told me that the big customer is a city. So it probably has to do with the homeless shelters and so on, you know, where the city houses people. So, but you see a lot of those trucks, and I guess one of the questions that you ask when you are in those neighborhoods is how high can you go without the truck sort of tipping over? And also, if you do the alleys, you find things like this, which is a barber that comes around and cuts hair. So he gets called to cut hair, and he's doing the family there.
Makes house calls.
Yeah. And here in the backyard, you can see the different uses. It's a place for play. It's where you put your things, your merchandise together, those big bags. They probably have used clothes or something that you then can put on a fence and put for sale. And also there is a dog house that you can barely see it all the way to the my right, and that's security. Again, this is one of the most interesting encounters with Diego Rivera, which I like him very much, but there he was. I'm sure he would have enjoyed to know that his billboard that was used for publicize the show at LACMA was being used to give privacy to a family in South
Protected by Diego Rivera.
And this is a night shot. Now we're moving to Skid Row. That I was just there, I noticed a couple of changes, and we've been talking about. One of the changes that just happened recently, it was almost surrealistic, is that someone discovered that one way to get rid of the homeless tents was to plant greenery. So you actually dig the sidewalk, you bring some soil, you plant greenery, and then there is no room for tents. So the street where your business is doesn't have homeless people.
So it's a different kind of what we've referred to as defensive architecture, except it's a little more insidious in how subtle it is because it's landscape now.
Yeah. And the other thing I noticed is that the tents are getting bigger. And there is something like row houses of tents, so that you have 3 or 4 tents that are linked together. So you basically, from the street, you don't know what is going on inside. It could be a party, could be anything.
Have you been photographing those on this visit?
Yeah, I want to do that. Yeah, I want to have it's sort of varieties of tents, sort of LA tents, and I think. Of course, they reflect what was popular maybe 4 or 5 years before, and then people get rid of them, and then the homeless use them. That's another. And those white patches, they are the graffiti. The graffiti was there, so the city or the people who own the business there, they get rid of the graffiti doing that. That was the thing that surprised me very much. This was about, I would say, 5 in the morning. And these 2 guys were very drunk. One was Asian and one was white. And they had a party because one of the facilities right across from this building, and I can't tell you the address right now, but right across the building, there was a facility that I think it had to do with fish, so that they sort of rented the place for a party, and they were there talking to each other, waiting for Uber to pick them up. So part of what I found very, that has surprised me, is sort of the ability of productive enterprises to live with homelessness, and homelessness trying to create productive enterprises themselves, like fixing bikes, selling old shoes, selling, so it's like, the way in which that coexistence could go on for so long. But I think that this planting is something else. This is like really heavy warfare.
Mm-hmm. I've just had a couple of calls from some our journalism students at USC Annenberg who are writing a piece on just this planting, actually, just this landscaping, just coincidentally in the last couple of days. So I think it's people are thinking about what it means.
And this lady here sort of became a staple Skid Row. Everybody knew her name, and that particular corner there is now being rebuilt. There's a scaffolding there. This is on East Fifth, and I think San Pedro is this side of the street. That was one of the. There's some Latino artists, I believe the Mojado brothers, did this piece, and this was about again 20 years ago, and you can see how the fires have sort of eroded it, and so that even death could die. But actually, it's up here; it's not there anymore. This was a tree, and I'm just interested. Then I first in this the way in which trees can look like matchsticks here. You know, it's just they almost lose completely their character as trees, and then they come back. And this tree is still in Skid Row, Gladys, and so I got it about 10 years ago, and then I did it last year, and there it is. It's the same tree. And here you see a lot of, of course, street activity and arrests, and that's one. And it's just thought that the policemen look very much like Bill Clinton. And here's, I mean, you talk about sort of the different levels of power. And also here, and here I was very surprised when I took the picture, is that the homeless man was not mad at the guards that were surrounding him, but he was mad at me for taking a picture. And here, there was I hope I have the story right, that there was a group of one architect that came from New Orleans and sort of invented a new type of building that you can only see in LA, or I have not seen it anywhere else. And there are hundreds of buildings like this, but I think this is like the one that achieved the perfection, of its kind. And I've gone around looking, to see if the name of the architect is there anywhere, but I haven't been able to see it.
So that's concrete on the street side? It's an amazing marriage of sort of brutalism, Paul Rudolph and Regency style all night, mashed together, without windows also.
Yeah. And it always struck me, whenever I saw a show of architecture, Los Angeles architecture, I would never see a building like that. And then again, there were buildings like this that I think, there were some architecture elements there that I felt were very strong. And then there was the defense of the building, the elimination of windows, the barbed wire, and all of this stuff that sort of spoke of where they were located.
And yet this image is really striking in terms of that. You're absolutely right that you wouldn't see an image like this in architectural photography or Julia Schulman, but architects who were paying attention to the streetscape of Los Angeles were looking at buildings like this. So if anyone knows Frank Gehry, the first building that really made his reputation was a project on Melrose from 1965 for Lou Danziger, the graphic artist, and it is absolutely meant to be as banal and sort of featureless stucco building as he could achieve. And the generic quality of this kind of mute architecture was absolutely an inspiration. Not to mention we talked about Ruchet, or the way that Ed Hockney was looking, that Hockney was looking at the kind of typical architecture of the street. So there's funny traffic actually in the way it works into the higher reaches of architecture.
And here again, it's probably a motel, or was a motel at one point. And you see some of those fences, that probably has to do with design by the police department, that they get tired of people hanging out outside the buildings. And then, one of the ways to stop that is to fence the buildings. again, that's a storefront church. I asked, why did you do this? Because you got love there, the love of Christ, and all this sort of jail thing. And, and then I asked the pastor, and he said, well, they stole all of our sound equipment, so you get to do something. That's in Crenshaw. And this, for some reason, is something I like very much. And I wish I had my papers here, because I had taken a quote in an obituary for Jonathan Gold, where they talk about him as writing about places at restaurants, but sometimes he's not writing about food at all.
No.
So I assume what a meal you could have in a place like that. It's a place that,
I'm glad you mentioned him, because he was doing something very similar. So the first essay that really got him wide fame was an essay about his attempt to eat at every restaurant on Pico Boulevard, and it was for LA Weekly in 1998. It's called The Year I Ate Pico Boulevard, and it was a very similar sort of attention, looking at every street, every storefront, and taking it on its own terms, and having that add up to the story of a city. It's very glad you mentioned him.
Well, this is a black church. I think it's still a black church, and all the businesses around them are Latino. But the churches sometimes stay longer after the people have moved out, because then people can always drive to the church on Sundays. That again is one of those, what they call mini malls. So I wonder what the Incas is, and I probably will go to this time and go and check what they sell in Incas. But there you see the combination of the hand signs and that. I think it's so LA, this desire to sort of portray all the products that we sell, or the most popular products, Clorox and Tide and Coca-Cola, and then the Virgin of Guadalupe in the middle or something.
Is that something you see in other Latin American cities, or is that something that seems a particular LA amalgamation?
No, you certainly see it in Mexico. You go to Tijuana and it's out there, and you see it in the popular neighborhoods in Chile.
Does it get reshaped in Los Angeles at all, or does it look much like you'd see in a Mexican storefront?
That's an interesting thing. I'm going to Mexico in about 2 days, so I'll re-ask that question. For one thing, here they're put on LA architecture,
right?
Which was not built for, was not built according to Mexican tastes and specifications. So here, again, this sort of struck me that, I was not in the United States, except for the barber shops and the unisex. And I've gone back to this and showed them the picture to the people, and they're fascinating. Here, all of a sudden, they look at themselves 25 years younger. And this was, I've photographed this building many times, and I picked this picture. It was a sort of landmark of Watts, and it stood there, and forever. It was like a destination for a lot of people, fried chicken and that sort of stuff. And then it closed in the 90s, at the end of the 90s, 2000, and there was an attempt to resurrect it. There was some church that was working on it about 2 or 3 years ago, and I think they gave up. So it still looks like that. But it's just that sort of modernistic building. I don't know if you call it Art Deco, but And again, this were the McDonald's signs, and I don't know if they were quite the original ones, but this is the corner of Washington and South Central, and
certainly repurposed. Signage.
Yeah, and there was there was that feeling. And the ones that really express, when you would talk to black people from the neighborhood, they would say they are taking over. But nobody else, it's just because the neighborhood was shared by them. The rest of the folks, if you were going to the white neighborhoods of the city and you were talking to people, it didn't matter. It was not an issue. So here is the second version of it, and here is the third version of it. I'm sorry that those went too fast. And what happened is that the Tacos El Gavilan, their building now, has been put right there where the sign was, and the sign is gone. But it was sort of interesting. I mean, if you do this kind of stuff, you kind of lying in bed somewhere in New York, and you think, what is going on with that sign? And you get an urge to be there. Yeah, there was like.
This is one of my favorites. Yeah.
You want to?
No, please.
Okay.
We can talk about it a little.
So I think there was a heyday of science in LA, and that was like from '92 until about 2000, and that was there were signs like this, and there wasn't just one of them. There were dozens, maybe hundreds of them. You would see them sometimes with many other signs, sometimes by themselves. And you could see the hand, and some of them were very, they must have been time-consuming to make. I mean, it was not just the cheap thing.
And also go back to the bathtub, because it's also a sign version of the architecture, like Randy's Donuts, the building that takes the shape of the thing it's selling, the tamale to the pub. We have a long architectural history of doing that, and this is the signage version.
One thing that facilitated this sort of golden age of science was the riots, because then there were many empty lots, and then the city wanted to stop dumping of tires.
They were fenced, right?
Yeah. So then the fence became an opportunity. So
the fence became a version of that facade that we've seen all those other signs. Suddenly there was a vertical surface to attach all those things to.
So here, and you have different versions of this. So the colors of it change. You're going to see another one further down. And here there was a black lady that used to do these things, and they were all over the place, and there were so much Los Angeles, and and then you would talk to people who had some businesses there, and they've all had seen it. And I don't know, I mean, I'm curious to know if anyone here remembers seeing a sign like this. Do I hear a voice?
Anybody? A couple of yeses.
Let me hear. You. I see. Yeah.
You have to go east from here. East from here.
Yes. South Central. Yeah. So, but there was a variety of it. There was such a large variety of the signs, and she was such. See, there you see another one, and you see another one for the refrigerator.
Another bathtub.
And another bathtub. I mean, there was something really rich, and now did you see just, a few things just written down, but they are never nearly as interesting as the ones that I'm showing now. Again, do you want to say something? This too, I just wrote a piece about the neighborhood in the Bronx, and when I was looking at my archive of pictures of the area, and on Google Streets, and I was sort of traveling through the intersection, I realized that a lot of the imagery that Puerto Ricans had brought to New York that was rural, it involved roosters and involved little huts and streams and hills and stuff like that. And they're just the opposite of the city in a sense. a lonely little place, where you could escape all the problems and everything from the city. And you could probably go fishing and you would have to eat stuff to eat. So this is from LA, and LA still has some of this, and there's still people doing this sort of country. So that connection to the country has not been lost, but it has been lost in the food trucks. And, so I've gone through huge parking lots of food trucks and check all the food trucks. And I think, and here you can help me, it's that globalization is reaching places that we never expected, or we didn't, at least not from the design point of view, we didn't expect it to reach. So that the food trucks, because they gotten so much press, and because they go to other parts of the city, they use stickers now, and they often advertise, other things that are not, what they sell. So they become something, not just the memory of who the people were, but or where they came from, but just another way to sort of...
Right, and the mobility being part of that. One of the things that Jonathan Gold really wrote about is the fact that there were so many pockets, subcultures of immigrant populations that you could eat almost as authentic a meal from another part of the world as you would find in that city. But when food trucks arrive, you have a kind of mobility. So not just the food begins to have contact with all the rest of the city, but the artwork as well. And those murals become something that is taken all throughout the city. And you're saying that it begins to be diluted to a certain extent. It's a metaphor for globalization, maybe.
So again, this is a butcher shop, and you can see that it's probably a sign it's going to fall apart too. And here is a person, and I used to follow his work all over the place, and I once wrote a little piece on him. It's Manuel G. Cruz, and he put the scenes of Mexican history, mostly in East LA, across from a cemetery, and in the area he had all this different paintings, and I think he had a wonderful sense of color. I think he's still alive, and he was there with Vaca. I forgot his first name. No, it wasn't Susana Vaca. The famous Mexican muralist that did.
Judy Baca?
Judy
Baca, yeah.
Yeah, she's like a contemporary. And there it is, and this stuff has disappeared too. Again, a lonely cow there. And this other, it's just one of the things that sort of attracted me is that I thought that I think everyone has some sort of vision of paradise, of joy, of poor glee. And I think when I find it in the wall and recognize it, and it's just, I find it very moving. And again, this is what we were talking about before, is that what are the essential elements that sort of define a Mexican or Central American or Salvadorian, Guatemalan and so on. If you have to put 5 images or 6 images, which ones are they going to be? And that's one of them, and the other one may be the Virgin of Guadalupe, the other one may be that big stone, the round stone that goes everywhere. And sometimes the way you mix it with the lowrider car and the big stone.
And this is on the LA River, right?
Yes,
you mentioned.
Yes.
So then.
Yes, and it has a presence. And then this is purely a commercial ploy, and I think when Latinos opened stores in areas where the population was mixed and there were blacks, then they thought that having Martin Luther King would bring the black clientele, and this is one of the examples. They've never drawn a black person before. And, they would be given a picture from the newspaper, and they came with images.
The way the flag is rendered there, too, is also fascinating.
Yeah, so this is another one, and here is another one, and this got changed, so this type of imagery is sort of very sensitive to what becomes popular next, So the feeling here in this particular one is that Obama would helps business better than Martin Luther King, but Obama then gets a quetzal, I'm told that. And the Statue of Liberty. Again, that's Martin Luther King rendered by a black man with the proper attributes, done the right way. So here is recognized that that's the way he looked, and the pyramids behind, they just fit in there. And this is a version in an originally black church that had a lot of Latinos in it. So the idea here is try to do a composite human being that has Nordic Europeans, that has blacks, that has Latinos, and so it pleases everybody.
We have about 10 or 15 minutes before we go to questions, so I just want to make sure you can get through all of your images.
So that's again this sort of black Latino thing that dealt in a barbershop. This is a black barbershop.
Before and after. I love this one because that's also what you're doing with the architecture too, the before and after shots, passage of time.
Yeah, so, and that's of course someone that was shot by the police there. And here is the most extraordinary person that sort of roams the streets of LA at 3 in the morning in this vehicle that he's designed that consists of 2 or 3 shopping carts, and you can see his feet underneath. And he says he wouldn't change his life. His brother offers him to house him. His brother's a construction worker, but he says he'll rather be out there in the streets. And here's a man who makes signs, which I saw in this trip. And I went there and took a picture of his new truck. And he came out, and I said, look, I've taken a picture of you. And I showed him the picture. And he says, that's my old truck, and I don't have any pictures of it. Can you send it to me? If not, I'll put a hex on you, and you're going to die.
So you sent it to him, I hope.
Yes.
Good. I think advertising signs is fascinating also.
Yeah. So that's the mattresses and the mattress industry, and each one is like $5, and you have your old truck, and you can eat, if you just collect mattresses.
So you're using a flash here. How are you lighting that shot?
No, just using the daylight. And there are some streets where there are many collectors that sort of hang together, and again, it's the feeling of how many of those can you put on it. And that's the most popular truck, the Toyota, which are the same ones that the Taliban used to use in Iraq. Again, some of it is fashion, and I've been fascinated by this sort of the fashion. This is in a wedding shop, and the other one is the sort of fashion, the designs for dresses for the abuelitas, for the grandmothers. So you can actually go to those big shopping malls in on Alameda Street, and you find what to give to your grandmother. Again, here it's for sale on the street in Pacoima. This is from the 90s. And these are people who they'll paint your portrait, so they go on the bus and showed people how they can make them look like movie stars. And again, we're back in we're almost finished here, where the other picture was from, this was almost the iconic view of, the iconic mural of Skid Row. And it's sort of fallen apart now. You see only half of the face. And now, at that time, a bulldozer would come and you had to get your tent out. And the bulldozer would be protected by 2 policemen. And there was all the sanitation department that got all the abuse that you can imagine, you know. So that must have been quite a job.
Here's another series of as we finish up, of a building over time, over many years.
Yeah, this is the corner of MacArthur Park and 7th Street, Alameda and 7th Street. And it's about over 20 years that go between this and the next one. And this was very much of a Latin building. This is a building that if you go to the main square in many towns in Latin America, this would be like the main building or one of the main buildings. And this is what the building looks like now. And it's one of the franchises, you know, which is all the way to the right. It's now Mac Taco. So you see it there. I can't even read it, but it's something or other, Payless Juice or something. But it's an area that is gentrifying, I'm told, yet you don't see gentrification. And what you see over the years is a tremendous increase of the street vendors. So when in the first picture you see very few street vendors, you see it now it's so crowded. And this is the corner itself, the way it is now. And here is the last picture, I think, is well, not the last one is coming after this, but this one I was going to show you because this is something that you rarely see in other cities, and that is, that's children holding babies, you see, and you know, so I hadn't seen that in the Bronx. I haven't seen that in Brooklyn or in Detroit. Or any
And again, when you hear people say no one walks in Los Angeles or we have no street life, I mean, you just think of images like this. Depends which part of town you're spending time in.
And the last picture is here, I think. It's Dr. Pacheco. So I wanted to show you a celebrity. I'm in Los Angeles. Dr. Pacheco, nobody would recognize him as a celebrity, but his picture had been seen by millions because he's out there on the corner of Wilshire and Alvarado, and the number of people that pass by it is very large. Plus, I took it at night. I drove the car into the sidewalk and stood on the roof, and a homeless man came and he says, "Why are you taking pictures of people?" And then he just thought that somehow he was alive or something. So that's Dr. Pacheco, properly pigeonized, as you
Yes, anti-pigeon spikes. So before we open it up to questions, which we'll do in just a second, I think one of the remarkable elements of these photographs of buildings over time, you said that they wouldn't show up in traditional, these are buildings that wouldn't be captured in architectural photography traditionally. Also, the passage of time is something that even in architecture criticism, we struggle with. We always say in theory that it would be great to write about a building when it's new and then visit it when it's a couple of years old and come back and see how the promises that the architects or developers made when the building was new are panning out in terms of how the building is being used or aging, et cetera. And it's always, I found that it was always very difficult to convince my editors that that was a worthwhile project to see how buildings age. And it was always something we really had to fight to get in the paper. And so this is an example of the value of thinking that way about the cityscape. So thank you for taking us through that tremendous group of photographs. And, we're going to
This brings us to our Q&A
questions.
portion of this evening. There will be myself and my coworker Alondra. We will come around with microphones. Just please raise your hand and we'll come to you. Please speak clearly into the microphone as well because we are recording this evening. Any questions? Okay, we'll go ahead and start right here at front and center.
Yeah, I like how you have people that wander through the pictures and kind of give you a sense of the neighborhood. I was wondering, when you shoot these locations, do you take like with people, without people? How do you pick the ones that are kind of like the, I don't know, like at the Keepers, the series that kind of are the ones that typify the neighborhood with residents there, people wandering through? I like it, like there's always somebody kind of just is through the scene that kind of gives you a sense of that neighborhood or that feel. And I was wondering if you do that, you wait around with the right person, or how you compose those pictures.
I do, and it's almost gotten me killed several times because it's, you know, the streets like Avalon Boulevard or South Central Avenue, you know, they're busy streets and people drive fast. And if you stand on the street, you know, just to get the proper shot, you know, you have to dodge the cars. And if you really concentrate, you know, to try to make the building look straight, you sometimes sort of forget that there's a traffic.
That you're in the middle of the street, the cars are coming.
So, but that has been my ideal, is how do you do that sort of building and people portrait of a city, so that you don't just look at the building and look at the signs and look. I mean, that's rich enough, but I think having the people and the way they dress, and whether, you know, whether they are old or young, how they have their children, whether they hold hands or not, you know, whether they are they look friendly, where they don't look friendly, or whatever. I think that's very important.
It's another difference between you and architectural photographers. Typically, an architectural photographer will wait for the people to get out of the frame, and you are waiting for people to get in the frame.
Yes.
A key difference.
All right, in the front.
Thank you, both of you, so much. This was really engaging. And as a native Angelino, I really love this. So the one shot of the wall with the mural that you said you took in your 20s, when did you start, you know, thinking, okay, I want to come back year after year after year and capture? Was it back then?
Well, the first set of pictures really got me really interested in what was happening in those neighborhoods that were threatened. You know, I mean, here you are in a country that is all about energy and building and new stuff and better stuff and so on. And then how do you account for all these ruins, for all these empty buildings, for dogs living inside of buildings? And I just thought that the story, because it just couldn't be a one-shot thing, you know, of that building. Something was going to happen afterwards. Something was going to happen in the empty lot. Something, you know, and there are some empty lots in the Bronx that I'm still shooting after 30 years, and they're still empty lots. Yeah, you know, so it's in a way it's an addiction.
An addiction.
We have a question here.
Thank you for this. It's really enjoyable. I'm not an artist. I really know very little about photography. And a friend invited me, and there was going to be pictures of old Los Angeles, and I thought, oh, good, you know, I live in Los Angeles. I'm going to see some of the beautiful old buildings. And what this reminds me of is, you know how Van Gogh, when he was painting pictures that weren't popular at the time, ordinary people or not pretty scenes, and he wasn't very popular, a lot of art at that time was not things that people were normally painting, and it wasn't popular. Could you talk about, you know, your photography and how it might relate to that this is not what you would normally think of as, you know, beautiful photography until you look at it through different eyes?
Well, I mean, what's happening, for instance, what's happening in the Bronx is that as much of the Bronx has been rebuilt, then there are memories of you know, what it looked like, and for many of the people there, particularly the people in government or in the media, they're very interested in showing this is how bad things were. This is where we are today. So from that point of view, the images are important. And I think the other side is that, you know, as the immigrants become more integrated into the system, and you know, they want to remember their parents and grandparents and their world, then I think it's important to see all those things, even though they seem insignificant, because of their monetary value. I mean, who can put a dollar sign in some of the bathtub sign? I mean, if I did an auction, maybe somebody would pay a bunch of money for it down, you know. But they become things with which you build your past. I mean, your past doesn't have to be completely perfect, you know, and prosperous and trouble-free.
And we didn't get a chance to talk too much about your background, but it's also important, I think, for all of you to know that Camilo was trained as a sociologist, and that all of us, you know, clearly informs the work. But you told me an interesting story about why you left sociology, academia, and it relates to imagery to a certain extent.
Well, I mean, you know, if I could have made a living as a sociologist that used images, you know, and this was prior to Google, and I mean, now visual data is so overwhelming. There's so much of it that if you're doing social sciences and you ignore visual data, and if you're not using it, you just your stuff is bogus. It doesn't have any validity. But back then, you know, the images were not what sociologists were trained to. They were trained to do interviews. They were trained to interpret things, you know, maybe based on the record, what the newspaper said, and so on. And the census, of course, the census was most important. So, you know, I mean, I knew that there was something about those places that wouldn't make the census. That certainly didn't make the papers, and certainly didn't make the New York Times, and you know, and that, in my opinion, it sort of needed to be preserved, and I'm very, very happy that these images are at the Library of Congress.
And I've also heard you say that one thing that distinguishes your work from journalism or history is that those two fields are looking for events, and the images that go with those fields tend to be recording events, and you're trying to do the opposite. You're trying to make sure that you're in a place when there's not an event happening, so you get that kind of daily experience instead of the extraordinary moment, which is what photojournalists are capturing often.
Yeah, there's two issues with that. I mean, one of them is the photographer. I mean, Winograd is one of them. You know,
Gary Winograd,
most important one. You know, which is trying to capture images that have mystery, that you will look at them and you would you'll be taken out of this world in a sense, and he doesn't tell you where he takes the pictures. He doesn't tell you anything, the names of the people, or the dates are sometimes he gives you a year. And I think on the other hand, there's nothing wrong with you giving information about the image, because the mystery is still there. You know, the mystery is still there because you can't possibly encompass the whole reality about, you know, that street corner in South Central Street, and you know, so anybody can butt in and come in and say, look, he left this out. Okay, I did leave that out, and then sort of use that, you know, as a springboard for another side or another way to look at the city. So that's one thing. The sort of I mean, if you do enough image, if you come every year and you photograph the place, there are stories that inevitably will come out, and those are not stories that you're forcing in. You know, those are. That's what. You know, I'm sort of. The word reality is so fraught with with problems, because it's not a precise word, but that I'm trying to sort of grab on to that reality. And that's what you quoted before, about get an image of a hand, you want to make an image that's similar to what is here.
I have another question to your back, right?
Hello, thank you very much for coming, both of you. And I think the question, the first woman who asked the first question was exactly what I wanted to ask, but I'm sure there's plenty more to be asked. I've been a photographer for over 35 years, and I've started as a fashion photographer and went into doing street photography, and now I'm doing architectural photography. Your work's beautiful, and I get it. And my thing is in the transition of analog to digital, how did that work for you? I know it came in sort of in the early 80s, if I remember right. And I don't know if you're shooting digital now, and how active are you as a photographer right now as well?
Well, I'm getting old, but my legs shake sometimes when I'm up on the roof of the car. This time I felt it. Also,
Are you still climbing up there?
yeah.
From the
Also, it gets so damn hot, when it's 97. And now I can't just get up there standing. I have to sit first and then pull myself up. So my behind gets fried. So I can see that maybe I'm going to have to give up someday. But then again, to end up in a hospice, it's not the great way to sort of finish. So if you fall out of the roof, then you fall out of the roof. So I intend to go on as much as I can. And yes, I'm doing digital. And I think the great advantage of that is that it's not like you're thinking, that every time you click, when I used to click with Kodachrome, it was like 60 cents or 80 cents a shot.
Right, you're tallying it up in your head every time you...
Yeah. Now it's nothing, so I can do it, as much as I want. So.
Were there other ways in which it changed how you worked, switching to digital?
Digital? Well, it's also that I can get the perfect exposure. So I try read the building first, when I get off the car and before I get up. So I have the perfect exposure. It's also what it really changes is the way you can get the picture around. You can sort of ask your friends, what do you think of this? Or sort of send it to somebody as an idea for a story, a concept that you're developing. So.
This will be the last question of this evening.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We moved into our house 40 years ago, and in the alleyway behind our house, we would have, at night, we'd have people with burros, and they would be, they would give kids rides, and there would be food vendors in the alleyway, and all of that has changed, in the period of time we've lived there.
What part of the city?
Pico neighborhood in Santa Monica. So it's just amazing to see the differences, and I really miss that part of the of the experience. In fact, we even have a picture of our daughter who was really young at the time on a burro there. I'll have to dig it out and show it to her. She'll be amazed, because I'm sure she's forgotten about it.
Is there a question or just an anecdote?
Oh,
the alley?
yeah. I'm going to stick with the anecdote.
Okay, great. All right, well,
Thank you.
it's been a real pleasure to speak with you. Please join me in thanking Camilo Vergara.